well, here we go again. Hi, my name is Jessa. Please join me as we look together top 10 evil experiments in history not told in textbooks. And before we begin, in the last video I was in top 10 historical places haunted by demons. I gave you guys a riddle. Did you get it? The riddle was, what can be seen in the middle of March and April that can't be seen in the beginning or end of either month? The answer is the letter R. Well, your next riddle will be at the end of this video. Anyways, let's get started. Number 10. Breeding cows. Farmers in India in the 1980s figured out that if they were able to crossbreed their cattle, they'd be able to breed cattle that could produce more milk, which would of course mean more money for them and their families, and it made sense in the concept, but how was the execution? Well, different breeds of bull were brought in and farmers were expecting milky results. They ended up with cattle that did produce more milk, but at the same time, and they needed way more food or else they would stop producing said great amounts of milk. As well as due to the nature of the human involvement of the breed, they were actually more susceptible to diseases, and so they were left to having to do more frequent visits to the vet. So although they were producing more milk, which would have helped them economically, but the results of maintaining the animal and the product as well was a bit too expensive in the long term. Number 9. Remote brains. While at Yale in the 1560s, Delgado inserted electrode implants into the brains of primates and used a remote control that gave off radio frequencies to make the animals perform complicated movements. Later he placed the implants into the brain of a bull and got into the ring with the beast using his transmitter to stop it charging before it even reached him. Aside the animal cruelty, he even tried these experiments on 25 people and wired them up. Behaviorally, it only induced the people's anger and impacted more towards their aggression, but he kept striving for a way to achieve mind control and even once said, we must electronically control the brain and someday armies and generals will be controlled by electric stimulation of the brain. I wonder how that's going. Number 8. Forced separations. Clinical psychologists led by Peter Neubauer ran a secret experiment in which they separated twins and triplets from each other and adopted them out as singlets. The experiment said to have had partially funded by the National Institute of Mental Health, which came to light after 3 identical triplet brothers accidentally found each other in 1980. Talk about serendipity. They had no idea they had siblings. David Kellman, one of the triplets, felt anger towards the experiment, quoting, "We were robbed of 20 years together," said Kellman in the Orlando Sentinel article. His brother Edward Gallant sadly took his own life in 1995 at his home, and the child psychiatrist who headed up to the study, Peter Neubauer and Viola Bernard, showed no remorse, according to news reports, going as far as saying that they thought they were doing something good for the kids, separating them so they could develop their own individual personalities. Right. As for what Neubauer learned from his secret evil experiment, that anyone's guess is that the result of the controversial studies are being stored in an archive at Yale University, and you actually can't find them until 2066. Number 7. Lose it now. Although she was not a medical doctor, she received a license to practice medicine through a loophole that granted practitioners of alternative medicine. Known as Dr. Linda Burfield Hazard, she believed that fasting, or scientific fasting, as she would write 2 books on the subject, was essential for better health. She created her own sanitarium where inpatients would fast for days and for weeks and for months and so on only small amounts of tomato, asparagus juice, and if they're lucky, a very small teaspoon of orange juice. The patients were also given daily enemas as well as massages that the nurses said sounded like beatings. Under her care, over 40 patients had passed away, and she claimed that they died previously of undiagnosed conditions. She was convicted of killing of the death of the wealthy British woman who lost 50 pounds, and it was even discovered that Hazard forged the woman's will to make her a beneficiary and stole the patient's valuables. She ended up dying in 1935. Number 6. Game Operation. Do you remember that game? It was super fun. It was with the little guy with a buzzer, and if you mess up it would buzz. Although he's been credited with helping bring with the most more important advances of open heart surgery, his gruesome act was that on experimentation on animals. Sergei wasn't content with slicing up animals after they died. More specifically, not only did he like to have to wait, he also didn't like the animals to die after they'd been decapitated. In the late 1930s, him and his team undertook a series of experiments at which they removed a canine's head and kept it alive away from its body by hooking it up to air and blood supply apparatus. He would also have another hound and all blood drawn from its body, only to later be brought back to life by the Soviet Frankenstein. I don't know what his obsession was about decapitating animals. He should have gone to jail. Number 5. Lobotomy error. Although he had no surgical training, he did work with other surgeons. Walter Freeman was an American physician and advocate of psychosurgery, and alongside Dr. James W. Watts. He became the first in the US to perform a prefrontal lobotomy by craniotomy in the operating room. Looking for a quicker and easier way to perform a procedure, he perfected the transorbital lobotomy. This procedure would render the patients unconscious by electric shock, Freeman would then use an actual ice pick from his kitchen and designed and implemented the stronger orbital class. These instruments would then be inserted into the back of the eye orbits and then hammered into the skull. They would be wiggled back and forth in order to sever connections to the prefrontal cortex and the frontal lobes of the brain, and this left patients to a vegetative state or reduced their behavior to childlike mannerisms. And because of this, as a result, 490 people had died. Number 4. Lions. Back in the 1980s, a zoo in India found 2 African lions that were being used in a circus and brought them in the breed of their 2 Asiatic lions. When the cubs were born, it was clear that this was already a mistake, as the cubs had already severely weak back legs. They were having extreme trouble walking, and as they got older, their immune system started to fail. By 2000, they had bred more than 70 of these hybrid animals, and they finally decided to stop the program, and all the males were given vasectomies in order to stop any reproduction. There are laws that prohibited them from killing animals, so they were just simply waiting for them to die naturally. While there was a decline in the population of lions, it's kinda insane that they wasted 20 years of trying to develop a new species instead of just prioritizing the ones they already had in captivity. Number 3. Wholphin. By some weird Zootopia experiment, a wholphin is an extremely rare hybrid born from a mating of a female common bottlenose dolphin with a male killer whale. I thought when I first saw Wholphin, I literally thought a wolf and a dolphin, but I'm glad this was different than what I thought. The name implies a hybrid of whale and dolphin, although taxonomically both are within the oceanic dolphin family. They're extremely rare and have been found in the wild, but unfortunately most of the ones that have existed were bred in captivity. The first recorded wholphin was born at the Tokyo SeaWorld, of course it was, in 1981, and he sadly died just 200 days later. Not even a year. Obviously this is not working out. The first born wholphin in the United States was miraculously survived, was at the Sea Life Park in Hawaii in May of 1985, and her name was Kikai Malu. She ended up having 3 babies, and the first passed away after a few days, and the second passed away at the age of 9, and thankfully the third one's alive. But both Kika Malu and her daughter are still alive, but they remain in captivity because it is SeaWorld. Number 2. Human pig. I hate this one very much. As if this is ungodly enough, scientists went ahead and created the first human pig chimera, created in a milestone study for some reason. More than 150 of the embryos developed into chimeras were actually mostly pig, but with a tiny bit of human contribution of around 1 of 10,000 cells. The pig human embryos were allowed to develop to 28 days, the first trimester of a pig pregnancy, before being removed. The team believed that in the future their approach could pave the way of incubating human organs, genetically matching to a patient for use of transplants, or even testing new medicines for safely and efficiently. Similarly, the human cells could be engineered to prevent them contributing to a chimera brain. This safeguard was not in place in the current study since the embryos were only allowed to reach an early stage of development and the human contribution was minimal. I don't know why, but that's not halal whatsoever. Number 1. Human bodies. Although he was known as the father of modern gynecology, Sims gained much of his fame for doing experimental surgeries on slave women, because he was racist. Sims remains a controversial figure to this day because he was racist, but also because of the condition he was treating the women bisectogenal fistula, causing terrible suffering. Women with fistulas, a tear between their private parts and bladder, were incontinent and were often rejected by society. Sims performed the surgeries without anesthesia, in part because anesthesia had only recently been discovered, and in part because Sims believed the operations were not painful enough to justify the troubledness he said, meaning he felt like black women wouldn't feel pain when 100% they do. But still, regardless, the cruelty he bestowed on these women were not at all consented, and manipulated the social institutions on slavery to perform human experiments by any standard was completely unacceptable. Anyways, that's all for today. You may or may not have heard of these experiments, but it is what it is. So what's your next riddle? Oh yeah, it is what disappears as soon as you say its name. Be sure to put your answer in the comments below and I'll reveal the answer in the next video. Top 10 evil families in America you've never heard of. At least I don't think so. That's all for today. Thank you for joining me. My name is Jessa. Be sure to like and subscribe and I'll see your beautiful faces in the next one. Bye.